All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is the CalRecycle virtual trainings for SB 1383 Part 1. My name is Tommy Amundsen, and I'm going to be the producer today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Martin Perez. He's from CalRecycle in the LEA training section. So, Martin, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Tommy. First of all, thanks, Tommy, for helping produce this training. Special thanks to Leah Gibson and Melissa Hoop-Hartwick and the training group for helping us put this together. Thank you all attending this training, for participating this morning, and for providing your feedback. This will be very helpful for the rest of the group here, as well as other LEAs that will be seeing this training after it's recorded. Let me pass it on to Marcus so he can introduce himself. Marcus?
Hi, good morning. Marcus Santiano here with CalRecycle, also in the training and assistance section. Thanks so much for attending. We're looking forward to everyone's participation, and we're looking to have a good discussion. And again, thank you.
Great. So we're going to go to the next slide to housekeeping here. So if you are not already using Google Chrome, Safari, or Firefox, make sure you switch over to those for optimal viewing. So we are utilizing the Zoom meeting today for the training, as well as for taking questions. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand, and then we will then ask you to unmute yourself, and then we will answer your question. Or you can put your question in the chat box, and we'll take a look at that question, and then we'll respond to it live during one of our designated question and answer periods. For any technical issues, you could also use the chat box to put in a question to Tommy, and he can assist you. There are no REHS-CE units offered for this training, since this training is essentially an extension of the session that we had in the April technical training series. So then we'll go to the next slide here. And so thanks again for joining us today. So this training is the first part of a three-part training trilogy. And each part focuses on different aspects of the new regulations that will become effective January 1st, 2022, unless otherwise specified in the regulations. In this training, we're going to focus on the measurements of organic waste that's recovered and sent for disposal at transfer processing facilities and operations, and then also the measurements of organic waste sent for disposal at composting and in-vessel digestion facilities and operations. And then we'll go to the next slide here. This is an overview of today. First, we'll cover a video of the solid waste facility measurements. It's going to be an overview presented by Beatrice Paroli during the technical training series. It's really good because she provides a general overview of all those measurements. There's a lot of information there, but it's okay because then after we cover that video, then we'll break it down into different topics. So the first topic would be, we'll be talking about the enforcement agency's roles and responsibilities with regard to the measurements. And then Marcus will be covering the measurement protocols and breaking that down. And then once we get done with each topic, then we'll have a short quiz at the end to test your knowledge. And then we'll do a wrap up. So let's go to the next slide here. There's some commonly used acronyms and terms that you're going to find in the video, as well as during this training. The most prominent ones would be MO and SSO. Those are on the top. The first two here. MO is mixed waste organic collection stream, and Marcus is going to cover what that entails, and then the source separated organic collection stream, and Marcus will also be covering that as well. So you're going to hear that during the video, and it may not click for you yet, but it's okay because Marcus will be covering that. And then the third acronym you'd be hearing commonly is high diversion facility. And that is a facility that demonstrates that they can recover 50% of organics. And that's essentially their recovery efficiency in 2022 and 75% in 2025. And I will be covering that later on during the training. And then just to remind folks, so we're going to have a video coming up. Make sure we're going to put the volume to max on our end. If you cannot hear it, make sure you adjust your volume. And then Tommy, we'll go to the next slide here. Okay, this is a little icebreaker before we do the video. Marcus and I are fans of Back to the Future, and if you've seen the movie, then you know there's a scene where Marty McFly is watching a show with a group. To him, he's seen the show before because he's in 1985 and he's seen shows and he's aware of you know, what we call reruns because we've seen it several times. But to the rest of the group, it's new because it's just coming out that day, right? So this is kind of tying back to the video. Some of you folks, if you've attended the technical training series, you're going to be watching it again. So it's a rerun for you, but for other folks, it may be new. So this is something a bit of an icebreaker, if you will. So we'll go to the next slide here. And that brings us to the video. So then Tommy's going to go ahead and start it. It's about 17 minutes. We'll watch the video and then we will start breaking it down. Tommy?
My name is Beatrice Paroli, and I'll be going over the new requirements that SB 1383 added to the existing solid waste facility regulations. These regulations will take effect January 1, 2022, with a few exceptions, which I will point out during the presentation. Now moving to the point, the waste has been processed to the transfer processing facility in operation. Let's talk about the measurements. The measurement protocols for the MO are found in section 17409.5.2, measuring organic waste recovered, section 17409.5.3, measuring organic waste in materials sent for disposal, section 17409.5.8, incompatible materials limit in recovered organic waste. And for the SSO, in section 17409.5.4, measuring organic waste recovered, section 17409.5.5, measuring organic waste in materials sent for disposal, section 409.5.8, incompatibles material limit in recovered organic waste. The methodology is the same in all these sections. Even though it's the same, it's done for different reasons, and what to report is also different, which I will talk in more detail in the next few slides. Also note that the enforcement agency, EA, may approve, with concurrence by the department, alternatives to the measurement protocols, such as a different sampling frequency or sample size than those specified in the requirements, if the operator can demonstrate that it will be as accurate as the prescribed protocol. Operators are required to sample organic waste recovered from each organic waste type separately and calculate how much organic waste is being recovered and disposed. The sampling takes place after processing, but before it leaves the facility for recovery or disposal, and are calculated and are conducted for each reporting period. There are 4 reporting periods per year, 1 per quarter. For each reporting period, the measurement protocol will be performed over 10 consecutive operating days. On each sampling day, step 1, collect a random and representative composite sample of at least 200 pounds and weigh the sample. The sample will be representative of a typical operating day and taken either from various times of the day or from various locations within each pile of that organic waste type. Step 2, remove the incompatibles. Incompatible material is any human-made inert material, glass, metal, those types of materials, and also includes organic waste that the receiving facility is not designed, permitted, or authorized to process. Set aside the incompatibles to be measured and recorded later. Once the incompatibles are removed, step 3, reweigh the sample without the incompatibles. And then step 4, using the weights recorded in steps above, calculate the total weight of organic waste recovered from that waste type for that day. The operator would repeat these steps for each organic waste type that the facility recovered, including the waste sent for disposal. This is the equation used to determine the total amount of organic waste actually recovered, using the weights recorded in the sampling protocol as values in the equation. By dividing C, the sample weight without incompatibles, by B, the total sample weight, then multiplying it by A, the total weight of that specific organic waste type, to give you the total amount of organic waste actually recovered for that day. Again, the operator would repeat this calculation for each organic waste type, including the material sent for disposal. For example, let's take food waste as one of the organic waste types that the facility recovered after processing. The operator determines the total weight of all the food waste recovered for that day is 300 tons. Collects a sample of food waste that weighs 200 pounds. Removes the incompatibles from the sample, the plastic, metal, glass, and any other material that the receiving facility is not designed or authorized to process. Reweighs the sample and it weighs 160 pounds. Then using these weights in the equation to determine how much food waste was actually recovered. By dividing 160 pounds, the sample weight without the incompatibles, by 200 pounds, the sample weight, then multiplying it by 300 tons, the weight of food waste recovered that day, to get a total of 240 tons. This means that 240 tons of food waste was actually recovered for that day. Again, the operator would repeat this for each organic waste type recovered, including the material sent for disposal, and record the results. Once you've determined the amount of organic waste recovered for each material type, you can calculate the sum of all organic waste recovered and disposed in the reporting period, using this table to show the values for determining those sums. Record the amount of organic waste actually recovered from that specific waste type based on the calculations described earlier. Then add the amounts of organic waste recorded for each of the sampling days. Repeat this for each material type recovered, including disposed. Now, to determine the sum of all recovered organic waste in a reporting period, add the total amount of organic waste for each waste type, adding columns A through D together to get the sum of recovered organics, SRO, for the quarter. For example, let's say the facility is recovering only 2 organic waste types from the MO, food and yard waste. In the previous slide, we calculated the amount of food waste actually recovered from the 300 tons was 240 tons. So for food waste, day 1, you would record 240 tons. Repeat the methodology and record the results of the calculation for the remaining 9 sampling days. Then add the amounts from day 1 through 10 to get B, the total tons of food waste actually recovered. You would repeat this for the yard waste to get D, the total tons of yard waste actually recovered. Then add the total amounts of food waste, B, and yard waste, D, together to get the SRO, sum of recovered organics, from MO. The SRO and the sum of organics disposed, E, are reported to CalRecycle for that reporting period. These two sums are used to determine the recovery efficiency of the facility. The sampling protocol and calculations for the SSO is the same as it is for the MO. Again, the SSO does not have to comply with the recovery efficiency standard, but will have to demonstrate if it meets the incompatible material limits. The incompatible materials limit is the cleanliness standard for material recovered from the MO and SSO that is sent to market or for further processing. It is calculated at the back end before the material leaves the site, and is determined by performing the same measurement protocol described earlier for the MO. Regardless of whether or not the facility is a high diversion organic waste processing facility, The regulations requires that facilities demonstrate if the organic waste recovered meets the following incompatible material limits. On and after January 1, 2022, less than 20% of incompatible material. On and after January 1, 2024, less than 10% of incompatible material by weight. These levels will determine where operators can send their waste. Facilities that can meet the incompatible materials limit can send the material to any organic waste recovery activity. Facilities that exceed the incompatible materials limit must send the material to a facility that can meet the additional quality standards, such as sending it to a transfer processing facility that can get it to at least 80% clean by 2022 and 90% by 2024, or to an organic waste recovery activity that disposes with no more than 20% organic waste by 2022 and 10% by 2024. The method to determine the sum of incompatibles, represented here as SI, is the same as it is to determine the SRO, sum of recovered organics, from the MO or SSO. However, for the incompatible materials, you have to go a step further and calculate the percentage of incompatibles in all recovered organic waste, which can be determined by using this equation. This will give you the percentage of incompatible materials in all recovered organic waste for that reporting period. Like we saw before, SI is the sum of incompatibles, either from the MO or SSO. SRO is the sum of recovered organics, either from the MO or SSO. In this equation, we first have to determine the combined sum of incompatibles and the combined sum of outgoing materials sent for recovery. By adding the SI from the MO and SSO together to get the combined sum of incompatible materials. Adding the SRO from the MO and SSO together to get the combined sum of recovered organics. Once we figure out these two values, we can calculate the percentage of incompatible materials by dividing the combined sum of incompatible materials by the combined sum of recovered organics to get the ratio of incompatible material. Then multiplying the ratio by 100 to get the percentage of incompatibles in all recovered organic waste for the reporting period. For example, in this reporting period, the operator performed the sampling and calculations on both the MO and SSO for the quarter. Remember, SI is the sum of incompatibles, SRO is the sum of recovered organics. The operator calculated the following. For the MO, the SI at 170 tons, and the SRO at 2,400 tons. For the SSO, the SI to be 100 tons, and the SRO at 3,000 tons. Using these values in the equation, add 170 and 100, the SI from MO and SSO, to get the combined sum of 270 tons of incompatible material. Then add 2,400 and 3,000, the SRO from MO and SSO, to get the combined sum of 5,400 tons of recovered organics. Then dividing 270 tons by 5,400 tons, then multiplying that by 100 gives you 5%. This means that for this reporting period, the incompatible materials level in all recovered organic waste is 5%, demonstrating that the facility met the incompatible materials limit. Now that the operator demonstrated that the load is 95% organic waste and 5% incompatible material, where can he send the material? These are some examples of organic waste recovery activities. Organics Recycling Center that meet the 3-part test, compostable material handling operation or facility, in-vessel digestion operation or facility. Organic waste recovery activities are activities that divert organic waste from disposal to constitute a reduction of landfill disposal. Since this truck has 95% organic waste and 5% incompatible material, it can be sent to any organic waste recovery activity. Whereas this truck is 60-40, 60% organic waste and 40% incompatible material. Because it has more than the allowable limits of incompatible material, the waste can only be sent to a facility that can meet the additional quality standards, such as another transfer processing facility that can meet the incompatible materials limit, an organic waste recovery activity that disposes of material that meet the acceptable levels of organic content of no more than 20% by 2022 and 10% by 2024, or an organics recycling center that meets the 3-part test. The measurement protocols for the composting operations and facilities is found in Section 17867, General Operating Standards. For the in-vessel digestion operations and facilities, it's found in Section 17896.44.1, Measuring Organic Waste and Materials Sent for Disposal. The methodology is the same in both these sections. Processing waste at a compost or in-vessel digestion operation and facility. Processing waste at a compost facility will produce a finished product, in this case compost, and material for disposal. Operators are required to take samples to measure the amount of organic waste in the material sent for disposal. Organic waste that are textiles, carpet, hazardous wood waste, non-compostable paper, human and pet waste, and materials subject to quarantine is not required to be measured as organic waste when performing the measurements. The amount of organic waste in the material sent for disposal factors in determining whether transfer processing facility operators can send the waste to this facility. The measurement protocol to determine the amount of organic waste in the material sent for disposal is the same as what is performed at the transfer processing facilities, with 2 minor differences. The operator is removing the non-organic material instead of the incompatibles from the sample, and performing the measurement protocol only on the waste sent for disposal instead of each waste type leaving the site. The EA may approve, with concurrence by the department, alternatives to the measurement protocols if the operator can demonstrate that it will be as accurate as the prescribed protocols. Alternative measurement protocols may include measurements made with the different sample frequency and/or weights for determining the amount of organic waste contained in the residual. Feedstock sources for composting and in-vessel digestion. This will help the transfer processing facility operators determine which organic waste recovery activity they can send their waste to. Recall that an operator of a composting or in-vessel digestion operation or facility is required to measure the amount of organic waste in the material sent for disposal. This is where that number comes into play. If the amount of organic waste in the material sent for disposal by the facility is less than 20% on and after January 1, 2022, and 10% on and after January 1, 2024, then any transfer processing facility operator may send their waste to this facility, including those that fail to meet the incompatible materials limit. Remember that 60/40 truck? It had 60% organic waste and 40% incompatible material. It can be sent to this facility. If the amount of organic waste in the material sent for disposal is more than 20% on and after January 1, 2022, and 10% on and after January 1, 2024, then transfer processing facility operators that fail to meet the incompatible materials limit may not send the material to this facility. That same 60/40 truck cannot be sent to this facility. It would have to be sent to a facility that can meet the additional quality standards, such as a transfer processing facility that can meet the incompatible materials limit, or another composting facility that can meet the acceptable levels of organic waste in the material sent for disposal.
Okay, was a lot there, a lot to cover. If you didn't understand that now, it's okay, because we're going to be breaking each part down, and we'll be covering it, and then we'll have a Q&A period for after each breakdown. So we'll have plenty of time to answer questions. But for now, we're going to clarify the roles and responsibilities of the EA. And first things first, EAs do not conduct the measurements. That's the responsibility of the operator. So what are EAs responsible for? Well, let's briefly cover section 18083 and then what was amended to that. So section 18083 speaks to the EA's duties and responsibilities for inspections. The EA is required to inspect and investigate the receipt, storage, handling of material, verify compliance with the facility statement of standards and permits, and other related duties within their purview to ensure protection of the environment and public health and safety. The section 18083 also covers the inspection frequencies as required in regulation and as pursuant to their EPP. So there was an amendment made adding subdivision A9, which speaks to the EAs periodically observing measurements at a frequency described in the following sections: 17409.5.12, so that's under the transfer processing regulations. 17869J, that's under the composting regulations, and 17896.45K, that's under the in-vessel digestion regulations. So what exactly do those sections cover? Well, what it covers is the EA's roles with regard to ensuring that those measurements are being conducted accurately and consistent with the record with the measurement requirements. So the EA's role and responsibility with regard to these measurements is to review records to ensure that the measurements are accurate and that the measurements are being conducted and they're being conducted consistent with the applicable sections. The EA can also conduct periodic direct observation of those measurements. And the observations are to be conducted at a frequency determined by the EA to ensure that the measurement is done in a manner consistent with the regulations. So the language is the same for each of those sections that we just covered. If the EA determines that measurements do not accurately reflect the records, the EA, there's some options. So the EA may increase the frequency of measurements. So asking the operator to increase the frequency of measurements, direct the operator to revise the measurement protocol, or both to improve the accuracy of those measurements and those results. And the language which discusses the EA's talks about this is actually found in each of those measurement regulation sections. Well, those are a little hard to say. In order to verify the measurements are conducted consistent with the requirements, the EA should understand the steps for how measurements are taken. And we're going to cover that again. So we'll do a rerun of that later on when I pass it along to Marcus. And then we'll go to the next slide here. So there's a little bit more language to review here. So when reviewing records at transfer processing facilities and operations and composting and in-vessel digestion facilities and operations, the EA's roles and responsibilities are if the records indicate compostable materials sent offsite to any other destination other than an authorized permitted facility or operation, the EA must observe that material for physical contamination. If the physical contamination clearly exceeds limits that's allowable under section 17852 of Title 14, the EA can require the operator to further process that material. So what does that mean? Well, the reference 17852 under Title 14, that's the reference to the land application requirements found under composting, the composting regulations. So if the EA becomes aware that compostable material from any of those facility types is being sent for land application, then the EA, after observing that material, they determine that the levels will be exceeding an exceedance of the limits for physical contamination, and they can direct the operator to further process that material at that point. And there's in the new record keeping requirements, there is language in there which states that the facilities are required to maintain records of when material is being sent offsite for such use. And then we'll go to the next slide. And this is our first poll time and Q&A period. And we'll go ahead and put up the first poll. What are some useful tips to keep in mind when observing a measurement? A, be aware of operator schedule for 10-day measurements. B, be aware of the facility's designated area for measurements. C, become familiar with how the operator collects and gathers those samples. Or D, all of the above. So go ahead and take a few seconds to choose an answer, and then we'll close out the poll, and then we'll talk about the answers. So let me take a look at the chat box here. At this time, you can go ahead and type in a question in the chat box, and we can answer it. We can do our best to answer it. If we cannot respond to your question, if your question is so good that it stumps us, we can then collect it and we can answer it after the training. You also have the option to raise your hand, and then we'll ask you to unmute yourself, and you can ask the question live. Okay, it looks like we have about 81%. We'll wait a few more seconds, and then we'll go over the answers. All right, I guess it's time to close it out. We're about 86%. Okay, we have 91% of folks saying D, all of the above. That's the right answer. So all the A, B, and C are all correct. So I guess technically everyone got it right. But to that one person the few folks, the 9% who picked C, you're right. But it's also good to keep in mind of where they're doing the measurements. You know, what area have they designated to do those measurements? And Marcus is going to talk about measurements, break it down, and the requirements for the operator to how many days they have to conduct those measurements. So after he talks about that, then I think the selection A will become a little bit more clear, because you know then as the EA you want to know when is the operator beginning their 10-day of measurements. Let's go ahead and close this one and put up poll number 2. True or false? It's true or false question here, or poll. As the EA, if you visually observe highly contaminated material, in this case, material that exceeds the physical contamination limits, and is getting ready to leave the site for land application, then you as the EA can require the operator to further process that material. True or false? Well, you're not sure. So we'll take a few seconds here. Okay, I see no questions in the chat box. So once we finish this poll, I'll hand over to Marcus, and then he'll get into the measurement requirements here. All right, a few more seconds. And then let's go ahead and close it out. Tell me. Okay, 84% selected true. That's correct. That's the right answer. We covered that in the previous slide. And for those folks who selected false or not sure, I'll go ahead and give you the section numbers again. For composting, that's 17869K. In vessel digestion, the section is 17896.45. And then for the transfer processing, that's 17409.5.12. Okay, let's go ahead and stop sharing for poll 2, and then at this point, Marcus, you can take it away.
Perfect. Thanks, Martin. All right, so before we get into the measurement protocols, let's go ahead and talk about the kind of waste that's going to be coming into these facilities. So as Martin said in the beginning, you'll be hearing the terms MO and SSO quite frequently in this training and all of our future trainings. So what's MO and SSO exactly? So MO is your mixed waste organic collection stream. So what's that going to consist of is it's gray container waste, and that's from a single or 2 container collection service. And this is where we're going to get into the collection requirements a little bit that were also with 1383. So your single and 2 container system, that's going to be gray container waste. That'll be part of the mixed waste stream. And it can also include a 3 container system, which normally in the 3 container system, where you have your blue, green, and gray, normally organic waste is prohibited from going in that gray container. But if the jurisdiction allows organic waste to be placed, then that 3rd container is also part of the mixed waste stream. And what that means is that all of these gray containers from those single, 2, or 3 container service, those are required to go to what we call a high diversion organic waste processing facility for that material to be processed. So that's, as Martin saw in the beginning, that's that facility that meets that 50 or 75% recovery efficiency. So these containers as mixed waste have to go to those types of facilities for processing. And then you have your source separated organic waste collection stream, so your SSO, and that's going to be your blue and green containers from those 2 or 3 container collection services. Or it could also be part of that uncategorized green waste collection service, so that that dozer that goes around residential areas to pick up green waste on the street, that can also be part of the SSO collection stream. And then also within those collection requirements, there may be times where, at least in the future, where you might start seeing different colored containers, such as a brown container, which might be for like food waste. You also might see split containers. So a green waste bin that also has a split system where food waste might be allowed. Jurisdictions might start allowing these types of containers as well, and all of that would fall under the source separated collection stream. And one of the requirements that we really wanted to make sure was very important for you guys to understand is that it's this new requirement 17409.5.6. So one thing you want to do is be very familiar with the facilities in your jurisdiction and knowing what waste streams they're going to be accepting in their facility. So if they're going to be accepting mixed waste or source separated waste, or if they're actually taking in both. And in the case where they're taking in both streams, this is where that requirement is very important. And that's because SSO, if they're receiving other waste streams in addition to that, that SSO stream needs to be handled and processed separately from any mixed waste. And what that means is it needs to come in separately. It has to have a separate area for storage and handling. It needs to be processed separately, whether that's a different sort line or if it's being processed at different time throughout the day. But either way, that material has to be kept separate from any mixed waste. And the reason for that is the mixed waste organic collection stream, which Martin's going to talk about later. That is what CalRecycle is going to be measuring the organic waste recovery efficiency from, is how that waste is processed and recovered. The mixed waste is what's being utilized to calculate a facility's recovery efficiency. So if that material is being mixed with source separated waste, then you can't really have an accurate determination on whether that material is being measured properly and that recovery efficiency is accurate. So that's why this requirement is very important to understand, and that SSO has to be kept separate from all other waste in that facility. So let's go ahead and move on to the actual measurement protocol. In one sec, there we go. Perfect. And before I forget to mention, you'll start seeing these infographics as we're demonstrating the measurement protocols. So if you haven't checked it out yet, we have our LEA Central page and the news and activities section. We have these new infographics that we developed that help give a nice visual representation of how this process works. So we'll be going through these individually and helping describe the measurement protocol to you. But yeah, if you guys haven't checked that out yet, definitely do. because these are very helpful visuals that also list all the actual requirements as well. But what this, so let me start by going over the measurement protocol for mixed waste organics. And so with the section numbers to be aware of, you have 17409.5.2, which this is the measurement protocol for measuring organic waste that's been recovered from the mixed waste stream. And that is for material that's going out for further processing, end use, or recovery. And then you also have the section 17409.5.3, which is for measuring organic waste and material sent for disposal. So these are the two requirements for measuring mixed waste. And in the next slide, I'll be going over those individually by section. And as Martin mentioned, this measurement protocol, this is done over 10 consecutive operating days. And that happens every reporting period, which if you look at the regs for the reporting periods, those happen quarterly. So operators are looking to perform these measurements on this material 10 consecutive operating days every quarter. So like Martin mentioned, that's when you're on your inspections with your operators, you may want to be very familiar with when they're actually conducting measurements within their reporting period, in case you want to be aware and actually observe measurements happening. Because as the EA, and the reason why we're going over these protocols in such detail is the operators are obviously the ones conducting the measurements, but since the EAs are required to observe measurements and determine if they're being done accurately, then that's where it's really important for you guys to also understand how this process works. And so looking at this overall process, you have mixed waste coming into a transfer processing facility. And as that waste is getting processed, it's getting separated into all these different waste types. And then each waste type has to go through the measurement protocols. So whether it's food waste and green waste going to a composter, that's going to be a sample. If you have cardboard going to a paper mill or some other recovery facility, that's going to be another sample. Wood waste, and then they're also measuring that material being sent for disposal, so we know how much organic waste is in that as well. And then, so they're determining the sums of that organic waste recovery as well as what's getting disposed. And then they're also supposed to calculate something called the incompatible materials limit, which that was covered in the video, but I'll also be covering that in more detail later on in this training. And then they're also required to record and report those numbers that they get from these measurements. And that's, as Martin went over, that's another section EA should be aware of, is the new updates to the record keeping and reporting requirements, since those are new types of records that are going to be reported and recorded. So when you're on your inspections, obviously, those are additional records that you're going to have to review in addition to what you've already done currently on those inspections. So let's go ahead and go into this process in a little more detail. So as I said, this process is done over 10 consecutive operating days each quarter. So starting with step one, the operators want to determine the total weight of organic waste for each material type leaving that facility. And that's material for recovery, end use, or further processing. So in this example, food waste, on the back end, after processing when that material is sent off site, the operator wants to know the total weight, since that's going to go into this calculation. And then with step two, when they're doing the actual sampling and measurement piece, the operator is going to collect a composite sample, and that sample needs to be at least 200 pounds or more of material. And that sample also needs to be random and representative. And so what we mean by that is different times throughout the operating day, they can take a sample of that material or from different parts of the pile, just so there's a nice representation of that material in order to get an accurate measurement. So when they collect their sample of 200 pounds or more, they're going to weigh it. Since it might not be exactly 200 pounds, it could be more. So obviously they're going to collect and weigh that sample. And then in the next step, the operator is going to remove any incompatible material and weigh that sample again. And if you remember, incompatible material is going to be any human-made inert material like glass or plastic that can't be recovered. But the other piece of incompatible material is that it can also include types of organic waste. and it's organic waste that the receiving facility is not authorized to receive or permitted to receive, or they can't perform recovery on. So one example, if you have a green waste composter that's receiving material, sorry, let me start that over. So if you have a transfer processing facility that is sending food waste to a green waste composter, that green waste composter is not permitted to receive food waste. So in that measurement, the operator should be considering that food waste as incompatible material, since that green waste composter is not permitted to receive that material. And so that's where, in this case, organic waste may actually be considered incompatible. And so in this step 3, the operator will remove any incompatible material from that sample, and they're going to weigh that material again. They're going to weigh that sample again. And then with step 4, they're going to conduct a calculation. And this calculation you're going to see throughout all these different measurement protocols. And it's going to be C over B times A equals D. So C is your sample weight without incompatibles, and it's divided by your total sample weight. And then it's, and once you divide those two into each other, what that's going to tell you is, of that 200-pound sample, how much of it is actually organic, and how much is incompatible. So when you divide your sample weight without incompatibles by your total sample weight, that gives you a ratio of how much organic waste is actually in that sample. And we take that ratio and we multiply it by the total weight of material leaving the facility that day for that waste type. And that's going to tell us exactly how much organic waste is being recovered from that material type. So of that amount that's leaving the facility for further processing and use or recovery, how much of that is actually organic? And that's what's getting reported. And then this steps 1 through 4, this is going to be repeated for each waste type leaving the facility. So as I said, if you have food or green waste going off-site to a compost site, that's one sample. If you have cardboard going to another facility, that's another sample. So this gets repeated for each waste type leaving the facility for that operation. And then with step 5, after performing all the calculations on these individual waste types, the operator wants to determine the sum of organic waste recovered, so the SRO, by adding all those totals together, and that tells us how much organic waste was recovered that day for that facility. So again, this protocol is going to get done over 10 consecutive operating days every quarter, and then for each of those waste types leaving the facility. So as far as measuring organic waste and materials being sent for disposal, the beauty of how we wrote the regulations is that this 5-step process is the same for each measurement protocol. So that's for the transfer processing, that's for measuring mixed waste, for source separated waste. And this, as Martin will go over, you'll see the same protocol for composting and in-vessel facilities that have to conduct measurements as well. So it's the same 5-step process to make this a lot easier to understand and utilize from all these different steps. So in this case, for measuring organic waste and disposal, rather than measure how much organic waste is going out for recovery, we want to know how much organic waste is present that's being sent out for disposal to a landfill. So if you look, it's the same 5-step process. You want to determine the weight of how much material is being sent for disposal that day. The operator conducts another sample of that material. It's got to be at least 200 pounds, also be random and representative. They remove any incompatible material and weigh that material again, and then use that calculation, and that's going to tell how much organic waste is in that material. So having gone over that, I know that was a lot of information we threw at you again, so we're going to go ahead and this time and start another poll time and Q&A. So while I'm checking the questions in the chat, let's go ahead and start a poll question. So for when an operator pulls a sample, should it be random, representative, complete and correct, or D, both random and representative? So while you guys are doing the poll, I don't see anything in the chat as of yet, so we'll just take a few seconds, wait for some more of these poll numbers to come in, and then eventually we'll move on to our next section.
Hey, Marcus, there was one in there. from David. I mean, you may have already answered it. So if you see that one up there on the chat.
Okay. Yeah. So a question came in. What is the permitted level of contamination in an SSO organic load? And I'm wondering, and maybe Mark can help me out. Obviously, there's no permitted level of contamination, and I'm wondering if that's going back to how our regs used to be written. There were load checking requirements initially on SSO coming into facilities, but that has since been changed with the new version of the regs. We no longer have a load checking requirement for SSO, so there shouldn't be any permitted level of contamination on incoming loads. So I hope that answered your question, David. If that wasn't the right question, just let me know and we can try and answer that again. Or if you want to come on off of mute, we can definitely discuss about it as well. But let's go ahead. We got about 79% of our poll in, so let's go ahead and close the poll. So when an operator pulls a sample, and looks like most majority, we have 97% said both random and representative. We had one answer come in as representative. So yeah, so D is going to be the correct answer, and that, as we wrote the regulations, composite samples for measuring MO and SSO, they need to be random and representative. And again, what we mean by random and representative is being taken from different times of the day and through different parts of the pile, just so you have a nice representation of that material in order to get an accurate measurement of how much organic waste is in those samples. So it looks like I don't see any other questions in our chat. So why don't we go ahead with our second poll question? So if the EA cannot verify accuracy of measurements, what actions can the EA undertake? Can they A, fire the operator, B, revise protocol, C, increase frequency of measurements, D, both revise the protocol and increase measurement frequency, or E, not sure? So we'll take a few seconds, let the poll come in. Looks like the numbers are going up. If you have any other questions, please use the chat. But for now, looks like no additional questions. And we have about 76%, and it looks like it's stopping. So in the interest of time, let's go ahead and close the poll out, Tommy. All right, so as far as the answers we got, we have D, both B and C, which is the correct answer. For those that said B and C, we can actually do both. And that, as Martin mentioned with the EA duties and responsibilities, if the EA verifies that the accuracy of measurements are not accurate based on record reviews, the EA does have the authority they can increase measurement frequency. So increase measurements beyond that 10 consecutive operating day frequency, or they can revise the protocol as a way in order to get accurate measurements for those numbers in the records. So great job with that. And with that, we'll go ahead, and I see no additional questions in our chat, so let's pass things back to Martin.
Great, thanks, Marcus. Okay, so Marcus covered the measurements for MO, mixed waste organic stream. Now I'm going to cover the measurements for SSO, source separated organic stream. This is an infographic which shows a transfer processor receiving source separated organic waste. In this infographic, it's represented by a truck coming in. It's going to that facility, at which point it gets processed. Once it gets processed, there's going to be material coming out of that process after being processed. That's going to be sent for recovery, or for further processing, recovery. You'll see it. There's 3 waste types or waste outputs, however you want to refer to it: green material, cardboard, or some other type of product, paper, wood, things like that. And then there's also material, if you see the dashed line, the dashed line there, material that is destined for disposal. So you'll notice that it's pretty much the same measurements as Marcus covered for the MO, for the mixed waste organic stream. So they in fact are the same. For the measurement for organic waste recovered, those measurements are conducted over 10 consecutive operating days. That's the same. They're going through the same protocol, which is to take a random and representative sample, weigh that sample, then they then remove the incompatibles to determine the organic fraction, apply that organic fraction, that ratio from the sample to the total tons that was sent out for that organic waste type or that organic output. And then they'll get a sum of organic waste recovered for that operating day for that output, and repeat the steps for the different type of outputs that they have for that site. Will depend on the site, obviously. And then there's a measurement for the organic waste in the materials that are sent for disposal after processing. And those measurements are conducted over 10 consecutive operating days as well. So that's the same. They're taking the same sample, using the same protocol. They take a sample of that material. They remove the non-organics. They remove the non-organics and in order to determine the organic fraction. They get a ratio, and then from that they will determine the sum of organic material that is sent for disposal. So so for SSO, they're doing the same measurements. They're getting the same numbers, which is sums of organic waste recovered, sums of organic waste disposed for that reporting period, which is a quarter. And they're also determining the incompatible material limit, which Marcus will be covering right after me. So next slide here shows the MO, mixed waste organic recovery efficiency. And so this is used to determine if a facility is considered a high diversion facility. And a high diversion facility is a facility that meets 50% organic recovery efficiency by 2022 and 75% by 2025. If you read this regulation, and let me give you the regulation section reference, that's 17409.5.1. You see that in the slide on the top. It's important to note that the regulations do not require all facilities to be a high diversion facility. The high diversion facility determination is used for the purposes of the jurisdiction based upon their collection service. So depending on their collection service type, they may have designate containers or gray containers that will have to put organic into those containers. If they do such a thing, then those containers need to be sent to a high diversion facility, which is why they need to know which facilities are considered high diversion facilities. And that's based upon measurements taken from the MO stream and the mixed waste organic stream only. Recall that those measurements are done over 10 consecutive operating days for a quarter, for a reporting period. That's a quarter. The EAs, as the EAs, you should be working with operators to be aware of the measurement schedule, because you want to, in order for you to ensure those reports are being are accurately reflected in the reports, the measurements are being done consistent with the requirements, and in case you want to observe those measurements. After they conduct those measurements for the MO, the mixed waste organic collection stream, they will then determine the sums of organic waste recovered and the sums of organic waste sent for disposal for that reporting period, which is a quarter. They will then submit that to CalRecycle. CalRecycle will then determine the organic waste recovery efficiency, and based upon that, they will see which facility is a high diversion facility from those numbers. It's also important to note that the recovery efficiency only applies to the mixed waste organic stream and not the source separated organic stream. So I'll say that again, the recovery efficiency only applies to the weights of organics recovered and disposed of from the MO stream, the mixed waste organic stream. And that's, I emphasize that because that may be a quiz question later on. The operator, as I mentioned in the previous slide, also conducts measurements in order to determine sums of outgoing weights of organics recovered and disposed of from the SSO stream, the source separated organic stream. But that's not used for the purpose of the organic waste recovery efficiency. Okay. At this time, we're going to go ahead and we have time for the next poll question, and then also questions if they come into the chat or someone raises their hand. Question here: how can the EA verify compliance with 17409.5.1? The MO recovery efficiency. Is it A, review records and reports maintained in a manner approved by the EA? B, conduct measurements, or C or D, other? So go ahead and take your time, well, relatively, and then we'll go ahead and close the poll in a little bit. I'll take a look at the chat box. I don't think we have anything coming in yet. So. Okay, we're at about 71, 76. Give you a few more seconds. Okay, let's close it out. Looks like 90% said A, review records and reports maintained in a manner approved by the EA. That's correct. If you selected B, conduct measurements, that is incorrect, and the reason why is because recall I said in the beginning, as the EA's roles and responsibility with regard to the measurements is to periodically observe measurements, and the EA does not conduct a measurement. That's the responsibility of the operator. So when you go out to do your inspections as an EA, you are observing those measurements, overseeing those measurements to ensure that those are being done consistent with the measurement requirements. We did get a question coming in. Let me take a look. At what point is a facility designated as a high diversion facility? How many quarters? So there's 4 quarters, four reporting periods. And a high diversion facility is a facility that meets 50% of the, if they demonstrate that 50% of the organics, if their recovery efficiency is 50%, at least 50% by 2022, which is, that won't be, actually that won't be determined until we do the first reporting. If we receive the first reports after the first reporting period, first quarter of that year. So that's going to be after April. Is that right, Marcus?
Yeah, first reporting period set for April. So I believe we'll start getting to know that after April, once those numbers start coming in.
After those numbers come in. And then it's important to note that by beginning 2025, that jumps from 50% to 75% organic recovery efficiency. So good question. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Marcus.
Cool, thank you, Martin.
Yep.
All right, so I did mention before we were going to talk about the incompatible materials limit. So that section number, just for reference, 17409.5.8. And this measurement itself, so rather than focus on organic waste being sent for recovery, this percentage, it's going to focus on incompatible material. And what this requirement is that any material leaving the facility for further processing and use or recovery It can't have more than 20% incompatibles by weight. And then after 2024, that percentage actually gets smaller. It actually goes down to 10%. So after 2024, a facility sending material off-site can't have more than 10% incompatibles. And so what we really call this is it's more of a cleanliness standard. So that material needs to be like either 20% or sorry, either 80% clean or 90% clean going off-site to these recovery activities. And the intent of that in the regs is that we don't really want facilities to be sending heavily contaminated, like dirty material to these recovery activities that really have no way to clean those organics. So in this case, it's put on the transfer stations to process that material and make sure that there's no more than that percentage of incompatibles going to these recovery activities off-site. And one thing we want to make clear is that when calculating incompatible material limit, this measurement is not a separate sample that the operator has to take. The operator can actually calculate this using the same samples taken for either mixed waste recovery or source separated recovery. And using those samples, the operator can calculate their incompatible limit, figuring that out that way. And as I mentioned, this measurement itself, it determines the percentage of incompatible material, and that's in the organic waste recovered by both the mixed waste and the source separated stream. So let's go ahead and look at that in a little more detail. And as I said, looking at these infographics, and if you look at that equation below, this is to show you that it is using the same samples from both mixed waste recovery and source separated recovery. So that's 17409.5.2 as well as that 17409.5.4. So if you look at this equation, it's I over B times A equals J. So you're still using A and B from that sample. And just to recap, B is the total sample weight. And instead of dividing the sample weight without incompatibles, and so instead you're measuring organic waste. So instead, you're measuring the weight of incompatible material. And so it focuses on incompatibles. And so rather than organics being divided by the total sample weight, you're looking at dividing the weight of your incompatibles by the total sample weight. And that's going to tell you your percentage of incompatibles in that sample of 200 pounds or more. And then you're multiplying it still by A, which is the total weight of that material type. And then rather than the total organics being recovered, we're looking at J, which in this case, we're determining the total weight of incompatibles in each organic waste type after processing. And this is utilized in both the mixed waste and the source separated samples. So both the 409.5.2 and 409.5.4. And so we're using this calculation, or the operator is in this case, and you're adding the total weight of those incompatibles from the samples. And that's for each operating day measurements were conducted. And so they're doing this over those 10 consecutive operating days. They're getting that total amount of incompatibles. So if you remember SI from the video, it's your sum of incompatibles. And you're using the operators are using this formula below. So if their facility is receiving both mixed waste and source separated waste, they're taking the sums of incompatibles from both of those waste streams. But if they're only processing one or the other, then they're just taking the totals from either mixed waste or source separated waste, whichever one they're receiving. And then, so those totals, combined sums of incompatibles, are being divided by the combined sums of outgoing material. So any material from that SSO or mixed waste collection stream that's being sent out for recovery, further processing, or end use, you're dividing your sum of incompatibles by that total and then multiplying it by 100, and that gives the facility's percentage of incompatibles. So that's, if that number, if you remember from the requirement, that percentage of incompatible material, it needs to be no more than 20%. And then after 2024, it can't be more than 10%. So if a facility's incompatible limit is above 20, then they don't meet this requirement. So they're actually not meeting the incompatible materials limit. And let's go, if you remember from the video, that percentage of incompatible material, it's really going to direct where that material can go for recovery. So if you remember this example in Dee's video, if you have a facility with a 5% incompatible material limit, so they were able to get that material very clean. And since it's well below that 20% limit, then that material can go to any facility for recovery. And there's really no limit on where that material can go. And then if you look at the next example, so if you have a facility with a 40% incompatible material limit, so it's well above that 20% limit, it can only go to facilities that what we call meet additional quality standards. It really can't go to any facility but those additional quality standards based on the incompatible material limit. And what do we mean by additional quality standards? Well, if you remember from the video, that can mean a facility that meets the definition of a recycling center per Title 14. It can also be a transfer processing facility or operation that does meet the incompatible material limit. So if one transfer processor can't really clean that material below that 20%, then it can send it to another transfer processing facility that actually can process that material and remove those incompatibles and contaminants in order to make that material clean. So it can go to a facility that does meet the incompatible limit. And then Martin will go into a lot more detail on this later. But additional quality standards can also be either a compost facility or an in-vessel digestion facility that demonstrates that the percentage of organic material in their material sent for disposal is less than 20%. So as I said, Martin's going to go into a lot more detail, but as long as those composters or in-vessel facilities have a very small percentage of organic waste in the material they're sending for disposal, they will also qualify as a facility that meets additional quality standards. So that truck that doesn't meet the incompatible limit can send it to any of these type of recovery activities based on that requirement. So we threw a lot more information at you on the incompatible limit. So let's go ahead and start another poll time and some questions. And so I don't see anything that is coming through the chat. So let's go ahead and do our first poll question. So true or false, food material that is removed from the mixed waste organic collection stream after processing that is sent to a green waste composting facility would be considered incompatible material. So is that true, false, or not sure? So we'll let a little bit of time go by, let that poll go up, and then no questions in through the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, send them in through the chat. We'll see if we can answer them. For now, we got about 54% answered in the poll, so we'll just give that a few more seconds.
Marcus, I think we had one, unless I missed it, from Claudia.
I believe Martin had answered. Oh, wait. Yes, that one was actually answered by Martin previously.
Okay.
Version, and thank you for checking that. Perfect. All right, we have about 75%. So let's go ahead and close the poll. So looks like 64% said true, which is the correct answer. So for those that said false or not sure, I'd mentioned this briefly in the measurement piece for mixed waste recovery, and that when you're looking at incompatible material, that's human-made inert material like glass or plastic, but it can also be organic waste that the receiving facility is not authorized or permitted to receive, or they can't perform recovery on. So in this example, since food waste is going to a green waste composting facility, it's technically incompatible material, or should be measured as incompatible material, because that green waste composting facility is not permitted to receive food waste as feedstock. So let's go ahead and end that poll. And in the interest of time, let's go ahead and move on to Martin for the next section.
Okay. So this is an infographic of the measurements that need to be conducted at a composting facility operation or in-vessel digestion facility operation This infographic demonstrates processing of compost processing, because you'll see windrows and screeners, and then you see compost. But for IVD, let's just say that there's, the processing is going to be a little bit different, obviously, but there's still going to be some type of processing. So let's just say IVD after processing will also have either a product of some type or material that is sent for disposal. But in this case, we're looking at windrows, a windrow composting. They receive organic waste. At this point, you'll see there is material that is not suitable for composting in a windrow. So you'd see material set aside for disposal there at that point. And then there's also a point after it's screened out, there's material that's for product, and then material that, again, is not suitable for recovery and is destined for disposal. So of this material, there needs to be a random and representative sample taken from that material. And this is the same protocol as the measurement of organics in material sent for disposal for transfer processing facilities and operations. They take the sample of at least 200 pounds or more. Of the sample, they remove the non-organics from the organics, and then they determine the organic fraction. And then once they determine the organic fraction, then they can determine the sums of organic waste, which then allows them to get a percentage of organics that's being sent for disposal. There's an important note here for the purpose of this measurement for composting and for IVD. What's not included as organic waste? Well, that's textiles, carpet, hazardous wood waste, obviously, because they can't take hazardous wood waste. Non-compostable paper, human, pet, and then human and pet waste. So that doesn't need to be factored in for the purpose of this measurement by the operator. So that's something to be aware of as the EA. But with these measurements as the EA, you should be aware of when they're taking these measurements, because they're as well conducted over 10 consecutive operating days. So as the EA, you want to become familiar with their schedule when they do perform measurements during their reporting period, and that allows you the opportunity to then observe those measurements while they're being performed. And for record keeping as well, those records need to reflect the results of the measurements in order to ensure that those are being done consistent with their measurement requirements. And then this slide here is a slide similar to Marcus's slide. It's from the perspective of composting and IVD. After they conduct those measurements, they'll determine their percentage of organic material sent for disposal. That's going to then be used by the transfer processing facility operations, because, like Marcus said, if they don't meet their cleanliness standard, then they're essentially limited to where they can send that material, because the purpose of the regulations, the intent of it was to ensure that organic waste is being sent to a facility who can recover that organic waste. Because the whole goal of this is to divert organics from landfill disposal. So here we have two scenarios. Here we have two different types of facilities. One on the left that does meet meets the limit of organic materials sent for disposal, and then on the right is one that it has more, that exceeds the 20% organic material sent for disposal. So if a transfer processor, so let's go back to the transfer processor. So if a transfer processor fails to meet their incompatible material limit, Marcus said that it needs to go to a facility that meets additional quality standards. Well, to the one on the left, that is demonstrating that they meet additional quality standards, and that is the compost or IVD facility or operation that demonstrates that less than 20% of organic and the material sent for disposal is sent for disposal on and after 2022, or less than 10% on or after 2024. So if transfer processor facility fails to meet their cleanliness standard, right, the incompatible material limit, then they could send it to this facility, no problem, because they can recover those organics. So let's say a composter IVD facility operation demonstrates that more than 20% of organic material is sent for disposal on and after 2022, or more than 10% on or after 2024. Then that means that a transfer processor that fails to meet their incompatible material limit or their cleanliness standard, right? They cannot send it to this composter or this IVD because this composter IVD is not one that meets the additional quality standards, and that is those percentages, the 20 and 10%. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So we're gonna go ahead and put the first, poll question. Having gone over the measurement protocol as the EA, how confident are you at observing measurements during your inspections? And go ahead and choose. You can be honest with your response, and I'll take a look at the chat box here.
You have two in the chat there, Martin, and I'll switch control over to Marcus so you can see a little better.
Okay, what if a facility does not have at least 200 pounds of material for a sample? Then they must sample all of that material. Okay. Has there been a discussion about palm fronds? Well, palm fronds, if it cannot be recovered, then that's organic, that needs to be counted as, because ultimately if it gets sent for disposal, that needs to be reflected in those numbers. And right now, I think there are sites that are having sites or jurisdictions having difficulty with recovering palm fronds, and at this time, organics, those palm fronds may ultimately still go to the landfill disposal. The regs do not say organics cannot go to disposal. We're just, all these measurements are doing is we're trying to determine how much organics are being diverted, how much are being sent for disposal, to see if we meet the state's diversion rate as well. And part of the jurisdiction responsibilities is part of their requirements, right? Is to promote organic recovery, organic diversion from the point of generation, so that when it gets to the facility, ultimately more organic waste can be processed and sent for recovery. Okay. 17867, B16B6. Does it mean some organic waste over those 10 days? Yes. Oh, you know what? Let me check. Sorry. So 286. 867. Okay, so we have measurement guides that break down each of these steps. So if you want to take a look at the measurement guide, we're going to have a hyperlink on the next slide, and you can access the measurement guides. If you have any questions, you could always reach out to us, because that breaks it down step by step. But again, if it doesn't make sense to you, you could always reach out to us. I think those are all the questions in the chat box. And at this time, let's go ahead and move forward. So these are the resources that I just mentioned. If you have a phone, you can scan that QR code that will take you to a hyperlink, which will be the LEA Central webpage. If you go down to that news and activities box, you'll find each of these guidance resources. The measurement guides that we we had in our slides. Also, we have Q&As related to the facility portion of the 1383 regulations. And then we also have webinar slides from a webinar we conducted in February of this year. And there's also going to be, if you don't have a phone to scan the QR code, or if you just can't, having trouble with that, Tommy will also put the hyperlink in the chat box.
So let's go ahead and start with the first two questions. Excuse me. So in this section, you guys were given the infographics that we had gone over earlier in the training. And with each of the icons below, you were supposed to put the right steps in order based on the requirement. So in this first example, since it's section 17409.5.2, this measures organic waste recovered after processing. And so any references to disposal in the icons below, they won't apply in this case, since this measurement specifically focuses on organic waste that's sent for recovery, further processing, or end use. So let's go ahead and look at the answer. So in this case, the answer was B, D, F, C, and E. So remember that you're determining, the operator's determining the total weight of organic waste in that material type. You collect your sample of at least 200 pounds. You remove incompatibles, weigh it again. You calculate, and then here's the key words. You're calculating the weight of organic waste recovered. So that focuses on recovery, and then you're also determining the sum of organic waste recovered. So looking at of the 23 responses I have, looks like 13 of you got that right. So great job. So next question, same kind of thing, except you're focusing on organic waste in material sent for disposal. So 17409.5.3. So in this case, any references to organic waste recovery would not apply in this case. So let's go ahead and look at the answer. So in this case, you're looking at H, D, F, G, and A as the correct answer. You're determining the total weight of material destined for disposal. You take your sample of 200 pounds, you remove incompatibles and weigh the sample again. And then again, keywords, you're calculating the total tons of waste sent to disposal and determining the sum of organic waste sent to disposal. So looking at of the 23 responses, it looks like 17 of you got that right. So great job. So in this next section, we had you guys do a little bit of math. So for that calculation that is required in the measurement protocol, we gave you guys numbers and you were supposed to put those in the calculation and then calculate the total organic waste recovered. So in this example, we have green and food waste. And looking at that equation, you have C over B times A equals D. So remember that C is going to be your sample weight without incompatibles. You divide that by B, which is your sample weight, and you multiply it by the total weight of material for that waste type, so A, and then that gives us D, which is our total organic waste recovered. So by plugging in all these numbers, we got 150 tons of green and food material for recovery. So of the 24 responses, it looks like I have 23 that got that right. So great job. All right, so same thing. In this case, we're measuring the amount of cardboard that's been recovered. So again, you take your sample weight without incompatibles, which is 100, divided by your sample weight of 200, and multiply it by the 150 tons of recovered cardboard, or sorry, cardboard going off-site, and you were given 75 tons of organic waste that was recovered for cardboard. So of the 24 responses, it looks like 24 got that right. So great job, guys. Good job with the math there. So next up is wood waste. So you guys see the pattern. So now we're focusing on wood waste that's being recovered. So it's 175 pounds divided by 200 pounds, and you multiply it by the 200 tons of wood waste of that type, and you got 175 tons of recovered wood. So of the 24 responses, it looks like 23 got that right. So great job. And in this case now, you had to have the previous 3 questions in order to get this question. So what is the sum of organic waste recovered? So we're looking at SRO, the sum of organic waste recovered. So you take your 150 tons of recovered food waste, 75 tons of cardboard, and 175 tons of wood waste for a total of 400 tons of organic waste recovered that day. So of the 24 responses, it looks like 21 got that right. So great job. And then in this question, since we're calculating recovery, we also need to calculate what's being sent for disposal. So in this case, you have your 50 pounds sample weight without incompatibles. You divide it by the total sample weight of 200, multiply it by the 300 tons of material destined for disposal. And we have a total of 75 tons of organic waste and that material being sent for disposal. So of the 24,
there should be a bonus question here for catching the typo on this one too, because in that sample weight, when you're pulling out the organics, you're pulling the organics from the non-organics, and so it should not say incompatibles, because incompatibles only applies to organics for recovery. So bonus points to anyone who caught that. And if you want the bonus point, just go ahead and put in the chat box that you got that you found that typo.
Perfect. All right, thanks, Mark. So yeah, of that 24, it looks like 22 got it right. So great job with the math there, guys. And now we have multiple choice questions, so I'll kick it back to Martin.
Great. Okay, so this is a multiple choice. There was about 4. First one, the operator shall determine and report to CalRecycle the sums of organic waste that's recovered from the mixed waste organic stream 4. We have selections here regarding how many measurements are done in a reporting period that's in the quarter. Recall that we talked about 10 being done, 10 consecutive measurements done per operating period. We also talked about briefly in the video, and also and later and throughout the training, that there could be alternative frequencies that the EA may direct the operator in order to improve accuracy, in which case the correct answer for this one will be the second one, each day that measurements were conducted during the reporting period. If you selected any other ones, but each day in a reporting period, that would be way too many, or would be way more than what's required. Every other day, that still would be a lot. One day for each month and each reporting period, that would be not enough. So let's see how many folks got that right.
So out of 24, we have 18 that got that right.
Okay, it's a good number. Let's go to the next one here. A high diversion facility is a facility that meets or exceeds an annual average organic recovery rate of 50%, or 75% on or after January 1st, 2025, based on the sums of outgoing weights of organics recovered and disposed. And recall I said that this may be in the quiz, and I in that slide, recall that I said it's from the mixed waste organic stream only, the MO stream only. So the second and third one are incorrect. So let's see how many folks got that right.
I'm sorry. So we're looking at, of the 25 responses, we got 13 that got that one right.
Okay. That's good. That's still the majority. All right, so the next one here. Which of the following is not a responsibility of the EA enforcement agencies? A lot of these answers reference a review of documents. Take a look at the second and third one there. One is conducting measurements. One is conducting periodic direct observation of measurements. So EAs conduct what they do is they observe the measurements, but they do not conduct measurements. That's the responsibility of the operator. So the correct answer here, response here, will be the second one. Let's see how many folks got that right.
It's loading. So of the 25, we got 25. So perfect score.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay. This is the last multiple choice, I believe. Oh, actually, second to last, sorry. The facility's recovered organic stream is not subject to the incompatible material limit of less than 20%. If the recovered organics is sent to, so this is talking about those facilities that meet additional quality standards. Marcus talked about it in his slide, and then I covered it. I covered it during the when I was talking about the measurements for compostable materials, composting facilities and in-vessel digestion facilities. So, and for this one, either of the three are correct. So any of the above, you would select any of the above, because if a facility does not meet their incompatible material limit, so they're not getting it clean enough, they would have to send it to a transfer processor that can comply with that, or composting or IVD facility that demonstrates that their organics in material sample disposal is less than their 20%. So how many folks got that one right?
20 out of the 26 responses, we got 22 that got that right. So great job.
Great. And then the last one. So this truckload represents the incompatible material limit for a facility. And here we're showing that it's 40%. So it demonstrates that the facility does not meet the incompatible material limit. So that means they need to send it to a facility that meets additional quality standards. So it could be a compost or IVD that demonstrates that the organics in material sample disposal for their sites is less than 20%, or a transfer processing facility that does meet their incompatible material limit, so they can get it clean. So the correct answer in here is the second and the fourth one. It's not the first one because 25 is over than 20. And it's not the third one because 30% still above 20. So let's see how many folks got that right.
So out of the 26 responses, it looks like we got 5 that selected both answers. Looks like 18 only had the transfer processing facility as the right answer. So yeah, as Martin said, the in-vessel should also count as additional quality standards since it has less than 20% in their material sent for disposal. And then I just want to thank you guys for your participation. Thanks so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you guys in part 2. And thanks so much for Tommy and Melissa assisting on the back end, and Martin for presenting along with me. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. Thanks to everyone. Appreciate it. You can